Hey everyone, and welcome to this medium-sized lecture on this next unit. It's an introduction lecture on what's called the Industrial Revolution, which is part of something that a little larger process that historians call the Modern Revolution. And this starts at about 1750 and goes all the way up to 1914. And really the Industrial Revolution is sort of at the core of a lot of the changes that we're going to see over the next weeks in this unit. We're going to see a lot of changes sort of stack on top of each other, and they're going to affect all aspects of human life: technological, political, economic, social, cultural. And overall, they're going to become these changes will be self-perpetuating, and they'll even start to accelerate. The modern revolution and the Industrial Revolution itself involve numerous interacting developments. And there's 6 interrelated factors that are of particular importance. First, there is going to be a revolutionary change in the way that humans can use and access energy. Until the 19th century, the energy basis of human societies had been biomass energy, mainly the burning of wood to produce heat, plus human and animal muscle power. Beginning in the 1700s, the world entered the age of coal and steam power. The fossil fuel era had begun, and this is the era that we still live in today. The harnessing of steam by burning coal and later use of petroleum will greatly expand the amount of energy available to humans. Second, unprecedented global population growth accompanied the fossil fuel revolution. Between 1800 and 1900, the world's population more than doubled, going from 900 million to about 1.75 billion. Third, an industrial transformation got underway. In the Industrial Revolution, humans, Western Europeans, at first learned to exploit coal and steam energy to mass produce goods with machines to sell them worldwide. The Industrial Revolution began with the production of textiles and eventually spread to other areas of manufacturing as well as to farming and food processing. In the later 19th century, industrialization occurred on a large scale in metallurgical, chemical, and electrical industries. Once begun, it could not be stopped. The Industrial Revolution greatly altered the distribution of wealth and poverty around the world and also engendered new attitudes toward nature and society. Fourth, a revolution took place in communications and transport. Unprecedented numbers of people in this era took advantage of steamships and railroads to migrate long distances within the continental spaces as well as across oceans. European migrants were especially attracted to areas such as North America and the southern cone of South America, where the climate was reasonably familiar. Asian migrants, especially South Asians and Chinese, settled in many parts of the tropical world as well as in the Americas. Fifth, the modern revolution was in part a democratic revolution. Popular revolutionary movements we discussed in the last unit dramatically reshaped ideas about government and political power. While these movements were initially centered on countries around the rim of the Atlantic, their ideas proved contagious, provoking movements for the abolition of slavery, representative government, constitutions, universal suffrage, workers' rights, gender equality, and national self-determination, first in Europe and the Americas, and later across all of Afro-Eurasia. Finally, the era witnessed the rise of new colonial empires, using new technologies of warfare and political control that came out of the Industrial Revolution. The empires of several European states greatly increased in size during this era. The United States, Russia, and Japan also drew on these new capabilities to expand their own empires. The fossil fuel revolution was a breakthrough in human history. It was as significant for our species as the transition to agriculture. Coal contains much higher levels of energy per given weight than the equivalent amounts of renewable biomass, for example, wood. Exploiting coal on a large scale, humans were able to burst through the ceiling on economic growth that had been in place since the modern human species appeared about 200,000 years ago. In 1750, world coal output per year was less than 10 million metric tons. By 1860, it had risen to 130 tons. And in 1900 was 1 billion tons, 90% of global energy consumption. A second major source of environmental change was population growth. In 1700, the world population, according to one estimate, was about 603 million. By 1913, it had nearly tripled to about 1.79 billion. The environmental impact of this dramatic population increase, combined with the surges in economic growth and energy consumption, was colossal. Let us consider some major factors. One, rapid urbanization accompanied world population growth. In 1800, only 9 cities in the world had a population of 1 million or more. By 1900, 27 cities had more than 1 million people. The proportion of the world's people who live in cities rather than in rural areas increased from 2% in 1800 to 10% by 1900. The modern revolution saw 3 major migrations of people out of Europe, out of Africa, and out of South and East Asia. Steamships and railroads made major migrations of peoples possible in the 1900s. More than 50 million people emigrated from Europe, including Russia, during the era, 2/3 of them permanently. Most of them were looking for work, opportunity, and the prospect of living standards that were higher than they had enjoyed in their native lands. These overseas migrations of Europeans also had significant environmental impacts. This is because Europeans and their descendants possessed both sophisticated machine technology and expectations of relatively high standards of living. Therefore, they tended to exploit natural resources more intensively than did peoples they replaced. Another pattern of migration continued from the previous era. Between 1750 and 1870, about 1.7 million Africans were moved involuntarily to the Americas, most of them destined to work on sugar and coffee plantations in Brazil and the Caribbean. A third pattern was the migration of Asian laborers. Between 1830 and 1913, some 30 to 40 million Indians and about 15 million Chinese left their countries to seek work in mines and on plantations in European colonies and Latin American countries, as well as in Southeast Asia, the Pacific Islands, and South Africa. In the earlier decades of the century, many Asians migrated under contracts of indenture, which offered them free or cheap transport in return for a specified number of years of employment. Many of indentured migrants were treated unfairly and left worse off than they had been at home. Many Asians migrated to the US, Canada, and Australia to build railroads, and many became permanent settlers, though others eventually returned home. By one estimate, more than 100 million people worldwide were involved in long-distance migrations during this time. And that isn't including internal migrations of people within a particular place. There's also environmental impacts of industrialization and migration. The Industrial Revolution transformed the ability of humans to reshape the world's environment. Deforestation increased on a global scale. So too did water pollution from chemical and agricultural discharges into lakes and streams, and atmospheric pollution from the burning of huge amounts of coal. The advent of railroads and steamships also accelerated the spread of plants and animals to new parts of the world. We saw this in the Columbian Exchange. The spread of new plants such as maize, wheat, and cassava into areas that had previously been unknown, underwrote large population increases as well. Despite global economic advances in the growth and distribution of food, several major famines occurred. In fact, famines intensified as a result of increased global economic integration, which sometimes devastated peasant societies and sharpened social inequalities. In 1846 to 1849, for example, a series of regional blights ruined potato harvests in Ireland and Eastern Europe. The modern revolution involved not only economic and political changes, but profound cultural upheaval. It reshaped our understandings of the natural world and the place that humans have in it. It changed our conceptions of basic economic and political understandings and our sense of cultural identity. Today, we are conscious that the modern world is radically different from all other eras. That's it for today. Thanks for